This is For Advisors by Advisors. I'm your host, Evan J. Mayer. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Brad Wales. Oh, they're excited, Brad. Brad, did I pronounce the last name correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot, I've listened to a number of your episodes and I forgot about the applause at the beginning. My ego was not ready for it. So thanks for including it just to remind me on that.
No, hey, instead of hiring an entire audience for this, I thought the applause button does its justice. So anyway, Brad is the founder of Transition to RIA.com. Brad was with actually Raymond James for 17 years in the business development space and operations space. I actually had two people that recommended you. Joe Pellegrini recommended you, and then also Jeremy Masulo said that you'd be awesome. So I was like, okay, I'm excited to have you on. So welcome to the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. And I would compliment you. It's incredible the content you're putting out. I think there's a stat that says most podcasts don't get past 3 episodes or whatever the math is. And I think you're on track to 10x that in your first 2 months or so. So it's here to stay. So nice job on the launch.
Thanks, man. I think we're on episode 24 is my guess. Don't hold me to it, but yeah, I once heard if you're going to do something, do it right. So we're going all out and seeing what happens with it. But so far, we're getting great feedback from people, and that it's unique and different, and the concept is just more, I don't know, speaking to financial advisors and not the buttoned-up approach. It's great to have you on, especially with your knowledge in the practice. Brad, tell us a little bit about your history. Obviously, it looks like you got started at Ray J. You were there a long time. Can you talk a little bit about where you got started, what you did there and what you've been doing since you left?
Sure. So it was close to about 18 years at Raymond James. I worked for one of their subsidiaries, which was absorbed essentially by Raymond James. Did a number of different roles there. I worked in their independent broker-dealer channel, which had me closely working on things on the employee side as well, the employee channel, and then ultimately spent the latter 7, 8 years in the custody division there at Raymond James. And so throughout that time, I actually started in compliance, which I always say, not the worst place to start your career because you're forced to learn the rules and you get your licenses and all those sorts of things, but quickly decided that wasn't for me and ended up through the 18 years, worked through a number of different roles in finance, business development, and the latter part there was in the custodial channel. Then a couple of years ago, decided to break away, start my own entirely independent firm, helping people by the name of it, as you said, transition to RA. So I do one thing and one thing only, and that's help advisors understand, hey, should I be looking at this RA space? And if it is a good fit, how do I go about transitioning to it? It's been a wonderful ride, and I'm sure we'll dive into some of the mechanics of things and kind of what motivated me to go down this path as well. Looking forward to the discussion.
So interesting, because you do have an operations background, and Jeremy Masulo, who we had on the show, was talking a little bit about how that was a huge advantage because you know a little bit of behind the scenes on getting an RIA started in that process. Did you learn a lot during that 17 years, kind of going through not only the operational end, but also on the business development side of things?
Yeah, so it's self-serving for me to say this because it promotes what I do, but there's a lot of what I talk to advisors about that I just wouldn't have that knowledge if I hadn't sat in countless meetings where things were being debated or new policies were being considered, or just any of the intricacies that go along with actually a broker-dealer, an RIA, custodian, all those sorts of things. Folks that have never been inside, they can certainly still add some value, but I think you have to be there to be able to tell those stories and say, oh yeah, I recall 10 years ago where someone tried that and it didn't work because of X. And so that's just built up kind of institutional knowledge, if you will, that I recite almost daily, some experience I had that I can relate to specifically and give that guidance. So it's been very helpful, I think, for my value proposition.
And from my humble beginnings in the bank channel, and then looking through the wirehouse channel, and then eventually making the decision to go independent, I did not know a lot about RIAs, or that was even something that was feasible. And then as you go independent, you start learning a lot more, and you start hearing a lot more about people that housing an RIA, but then also keeping their brokerage with the current firm. And then it feels like a step-by-step progression per se, but not always, because I think each field for a financial advisor is their field. And sometimes it's the right fit and sometimes it's the wrong fit until you have the right fit. I guess my question to you would be, if you tell us how it all gets started. Let's just say a person like myself, I'm independent, I'm affiliated with a broker dealer. I decide one day, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, I want to go RIA, right? RIA only, or even do a little bit of a hybrid kind of mix. What's the process from A to B? I know there's a lot in between, but try to wrap it up in a,
Yep. No, yeah, I love talking. I could sit here and answer a 30-minute answer to that, but I'll try to obviously keep it concise. The first part of it, I would say, from your own journey, you can probably relate to this, that if the extent of your career up until this point has been in a particular channel, so maybe as a bank set in, or you've been at a wirehouse firm or only an independent broker-dealer firm, you can be a wonderful financial advisor, but none of that experience has necessarily set you up to understand how a different affiliation model works and why would it. So there is a lot of just misunderstanding or just, hey, I don't know how it works. And you always have to be careful because there's different voices out there that are speaking highly of it and other ones that are speaking not highly of it. And you could say I'm biased. I obviously believe in the RIA model, so you could put me in one of those camps, but there's other folks that would try to tell you, oh, that's not the way you want to go, or oh, it's impossible and it's scary and all this sort of thing. And look, it's not for everyone, but part of the process is to say, hey, what is your practice now? What's your vision for it going forward? How would that look in the RIA model? And you don't even need to worry about what it takes to transition to it, because first you got to see, is this even a fit? So that's a lot of what I help folks with, is just education. How does it work? What are the responsibilities? What does the economics look like? How does the flexibility play out? And if and only if you get past that kind of first step to go into your question of what's the stages, then you start looking, okay, well, what are the pathways into the model? So for some folks, they will build out their own, or start their own RIA and build out all the solution providers around it. Others might join an existing RIA, and there's pros and cons why you might do that. Others might, it's kind of a middle of the road approach, start their own RIA and lead on what's often referred to. So that kind of second step is still generically, we're not even talking about any particular solution providers, is how do each of these pathways work? Again, what works best for you and your practice? And then kind of after you go down that path, then you start saying, well, who are the providers that can support each of those approaches? And so it's a multi-pronged step, and you got to do them in that order, because there's no reason to get to the bottom step if it doesn't even make sense for you to be exploring it. But that's not a 20-minute conversation. There's a lot there to unpack together.
Yeah, a lot goes into it. So when somebody is making this decision, I've asked this to a few different people that have been on the podcast and in general, more just for knowledge. I'm very happy. I feel like the channel I'm in today is the right channel for me. But, times change, things change down the road, regulations change, and so on. So I've asked the question, what's the right asset size, or what's the right, and the answer I always get is it could be right and it could be wrong. And it's a very vague thing. And I think there's a financial end of it that, you shouldn't just be doing it for the financial end, but there should be some sort of number on a revenue standpoint or an AUM standpoint where if you're going to go at it alone, it starts to make sense at. Is there any numbers you can give us? And we're not going to hold you to do that because everybody's different.
Yeah, and that's a tough one. I get asked that a lot. I would start by saying I would always be cautious of anyone that can give you an immediate, quick answer on that, because there's often perhaps an agenda behind it. So it depends on if you're talking about a particular solution provider, whether it's a custodian or an existing RIA to join. They generally all have some amount of minimum. So if you're talking to a custodian that requires 200 million to use them as their services, and you show up with 80 million, well, guess what they'll suggest? Hey, you should join an RIA at your size, because they can't otherwise help you. So you always have to be careful about kind of who's answering that question, what the agenda might be. But the reality is, from a regulatory standpoint, you can have an RIA with zero assets. Many start that way. Many never have assets, or not many, but a fair number, because they just fee for service and they do hourly or whatever the case is. So there's no regulatory minimum to have an RIA. That the reality, though, is it is a scale game. So when you're small, it's doable, but the economics do get considerably better as you get bigger. I definitely don't want to put a line in the sand, but say, for instance, below 50 million, you got to have some really niche reasons that maybe that makes sense. The larger you get, the more doors that open for you. Certainly above 100 million, more doors open. But as I always tell people, you never reach the finish line. So even if you have 100, well, the advisor team at 300 million has even maybe some more options, and the folks with $1 billion have even more. So you're never going to reach the finish line. It's just, where are you in that journey and what options are available to you, which comes back to that education. How would you necessarily know that, I can or can't do things with a particular custodian or join a firm?
Yeah, and again, I'm not drawing lines in the sand, but I'm a numbers guy, and some financial planners are. We like percentages and we like numbers. If the concept is, if you have less than 100 million under management, based upon that kind of revenue flow, it makes a lot more sense to join an existing practice, to scale a little bit more on an RA side. If you're in that 100 to 300 million, maybe 400 million, you can look at all three options, do it on your own, or two options, kind of do it on your own, or use some sort of hybrid model. but you have technically enough capital to do it. It's just a question of what makes more sense for you. And then once you hit maybe 500 million plus, it probably makes more sense just to do it on your own. Is that fair?
It's interesting. It's funny you mentioned 500 million. I'm literally working with a roughly $500 million team that is pretty set on joining an existing RIA. And you could say, oh, come on, you have plenty of scale, plenty of size, the economics work, and they do. In their case, there's just certain things they just don't want to be responsible for. They don't want to be responsible for the compliance or the tech stack or things like that. And so they say, hey, joining a firm is better. And I always say there is no golden goose. There's trade-offs to each of those pathways into the model. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they're being disingenuous. So it's just understanding, if I do go this route, what am I giving up maybe from a flexibility and economic standpoint, but what do I gain? It's tough to say. Like I said, a $500 million team that is basically only considering joining an existing RA, while another $200 million team might say, yeah, I'm only going to start my RA. I won't consider anything else.
Yeah, no, I was more talking on just the economics, but on the economics, I guess I'm going to go ahead and say I'm somewhat right, but then it depends on turnkey. And when you're duly registered, there's a turnkey situation. I ended up myself joining a super OSJ initially with the idea that stuff was going to be too time consuming. And then after doing my own due diligence, decided to change that. So I think, yeah, you're right. Every advisor is different. Every pathway is different. It's really the responsibilities you want to take on and the additional time.
Yep.
Yeah. So talk to me about transition to RIA. The website is very neat, by the way. I like the educational videos. You have a couple of them are like the 10 things you should know. And I'm like, I turn it on, it's like 24 minutes. I'm like, I wish that was like 5 minutes. So I'm like, but the website is phenomenal and your breadth of knowledge is just phenomenal in it. Talk to us about what you thought when you started to create it and then the clients you're working with now and going forward.
Yeah, and a fair observation, I probably need to mix in shorter, for those that are not aware, I make videos and they're also in podcast form, but they're usually in the 20 to 30 minute range addressing a topic. And it just is what it is. There's lots to talk about. I'm passionate about it. And obviously you have to have an interest in doing a deep dive.
Just remember, some of us have ADD, so we need
can't get past that. Can't get past that. Yeah. As far as why I started my own firm, there are a number of different motivations, but one of the more kind of interesting ones. So the last thing I was doing in that custodial channel was as a business development person. And so was out there telling the story about, hey, advisor, maybe you've been in that captive W-2 environment your whole life. And, oh, wow, yeah, you should go independent. And obviously it's more eloquently explained, but you should go independent and everything will work out okay. And here's the process for it. But all the while, there I was safely in my own W-2 environment, getting my paycheck every 2 weeks, and I got my health insurance. And there's a lot of wonderful people in those roles, so it's not a knock on that. But I just realized I was being hypocritical, suggesting that, oh, wow, yeah, you should go start your own business. You should launch. It will work out if I wasn't willing to do it myself. And so I can speak firsthand, and it is scary to walk away from something. It is scary to have to figure something out. But if you have a good game plan and well thought out, it's obviously worth pursuing. I think it gives me a different perspective of working with advisors than I had before. But the idea is to be that resource where there's a lot of, I don't want to say misunderstandings if it's a bad thing, but again, how would advisors necessarily know? And there's a lot of sources for information out there, but I wanted to be a completely independent source. I don't represent any one firm. I don't have any agenda of a corporate story I need to tell or anything like that. I'm a straight shooter and I can tell it how it is. And so I had a vision for the practice. And just like you do with breaking away as an advisor, you don't do it overnight. You plan it out, map it out. And then at some point you either pull the trigger or you don't. So happy to say it's been going well. I talked to advisors of all stripes, all sizes, coming from wirehouse, independent broker dealer, bank channels. Interestingly, that I didn't really anticipate as much. A fair number of advisors that are at existing RAs now that they feel it's not their RA, that they feel they've either outgrown or the RA's outgrown them and they want to go in a different direction. So now the industry's kind of matured to the point where breaking away is starting to apply to existing RIAs as well. That's an interesting evolution occurring.
Are you seeing in these RIAs, the ones that are, I guess a lot of them are pure RIAs, but most of them have some sort of brokerage relationship with a firm for advisors so that if they are doing the occasional transaction ticket that comes along that's needed to be done, they can offer those services. I was speaking with an advisor yesterday that was down the road at some point, he's considering doing RIA, but that he still has things he may want to do on a transactional basis. these contracts that these advisors are signing when they go to the RIA, are most of them giving full ownership of their book and basically giving them the ability to leave at any point with taking their clients and those are their clients? Or are you seeing that RIAs are being more captive like wirehouses?
You're talking about that advisor that might be joining an existing RIA?
Correct.
Yep. So lots of different flavors there. In theory, thousands of different flavors, right? And I get a lot of RIAs reaching out to me. They kind of learn what I do and they want to be on my radar. And so I hear a lot of value propositions. And so there absolutely are some flavors, and they can be a fit perhaps for where you are in your career, but there are some that their value prop is, hey, we do acquire your practice, or we do have you be a W-2 employee, or we do have you use our brand name. It depends on where you are in your career. Those might be appealing, and there's some very successful RIAs. So obviously there's some appeal there. Most folks I'm talking to, though, that's not the stage they're in. And so they are looking for things like being 1099, retaining 100% ownership, being able to use their own brand, being able to absolutely leave if that choice ever came. And so the good news is the ecosystem has evolved to where there are a good number of very good value propositions of what I refer to as purpose-built RIAs, that these RIAs were started from scratch to appeal to the advisor that wants all those things, wants the benefits of the RIA model, but doesn't, for whatever the circumstances, necessarily want the responsibility of having it themselves. So again, there's always some degree of trade-off, but there are some very compelling value propositions of why you might look at joining an RIA. And I always point out when I introduce that to the conversation, I always say, hey, I'm not just talking about some person down the street, some RIA down the street that has an empty desk in their corner. That person probably exists. They'd love to chat with you, but I focus mostly on the ones that are purpose-built to cater to the kind of advisors that are interested in the RIA model in general.
Yeah, I'd figure that there's a lot of RIAs that are probably contacting you, trying to get in your good graces to potentially get referrals from you, and vice versa. Having those relationships on your end is a great thing. One of the things that I thought was interesting that I saw on your website was that you do offer consulting service fees. And to me, the amount of recruiters that are out there today, right? I talked about this on my initial podcast because I think a lot of the podcasts currently are run by recruiters. And so there's that conflict of interest where, yeah, you're getting compensated. I know that you mentioned you get compensated both ways, right? It's just dependent upon what the advisor's liking. But I think this is the wave of the future, I think, for advisors going forward. Talk a little bit about consulting services and what that can entail, not only in choosing what might be the right platform, but what about if somebody like myself wants to create an RIA and use you just to help consult to get the RIA off the ground and make those decisions and those chances? Is that something you also do?
Yeah, correct. And to clarify, well, there's two kind of revenue models. I never get paid both of them on the same engagement. Yeah. I don't double dip kind of thing, but there are scenarios where there might not be a situation where I could refer someone and they utilize a custodian or RA or whatever the case is. So a typical example that you'd know some of your Raymond James folks you maybe have seen, if someone wants to do an internal transition within a firm, a Raymond James and LPL, and they move over to the custodial channel, there's a lot, they might say, hey, I want to do this internally, but there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to understand. So Brad, could you help me with all that? And that's a perfect example, yeah, where I just do direct consultant work for folks. Other times it might be, hey, I just want that education at this stage in it. And more than happy to do that. And I have packages that I share with people, and to the degree they want to use me a little or use me a lot, there's a whole range of them. But yeah, that's available. But again, I never double dip.
Never double dip, right? So I wanted to dive deep into this a little bit because I think this is the new thing going on in our business. And when I say new thing, maybe it's only new to me, but we're seeing these funding companies that are coming in and they're buying, there's offers to buy a percentage of your business. We saw this with some of the OSJs here. We've seen it with outside, where these groups, these investment banking groups basically are coming in and buying a portion of revenue. The concept is that eventually you're going to have access to some special purpose vehicle where eventually it'll go public and you'll be able to sell your practice for a 10 to 20 times multiple about what's going on in this arena. To me, I didn't hear much about this until about 3 years ago. 3 years ago, again, was never independent, so never really heard about it. But now I'm seeing it like last year, I saw it all over the place. I mean, obviously with the market in disarray and interest rates going up, you're not hearing a lot about that golden ticket coming. But what are your thoughts on what's going on out there with this?
Yeah, you do see an increasing number of these RIA platform options you can join that they typically make it optional. It's not a mandatory thing where they'll agree to buy maybe 10% of the practice. And the idea is, hey, you as an advisor, do you want to take some chips off the table? And the thought is, where again on that trajectory of your career are you? Does it make sense to be cashing out a little at that point? The challenge, of course, is there is no free lunch, right? So the minute you do that, and typically those deals do have a clause that allows you to buy it back at some point in the future if circumstances warranted it. But the challenge is that the minute you do that, you're now more tied to that particular firm. And so if you ever did want to go in a different direction, it's potentially possible to unwind that, but possibly at a premium, possibly at a lot of legwork to make happen. So it's not to say it's not a good idea where warranted, but I think advisors just do want to think long and hard before they necessarily pull that scrape off. Because although you join, if anyone makes a move, and I'm sure this was your goal when you made your move, you're hopefully only making one more move, and that's it for the balance of your career. And that might be the case, and maybe not. But if it is, great, and that plays out. But on the chance the industry continues to change, your practice continues to change, it is tough that the more you're wedded to one particular solution, it does handcuff you a little. But for those that need a little chips off the table, it's there for the taking.
Yeah, I guess my question is more in the, my thoughts on this are a little bit in the regulatory scheme of things down the road. It's going to be very difficult to ever sell a massive amount of advisors, especially if they're with different firms on the independent side. Maybe on the RIA side only, technically you own your book of business and you own your clients. On the independent side, it's a little bit, I think, different. And I think that's going to get a little interesting going down the road. I wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different flavors of independence where the advisors, as is the case with you, you're 1099, you are a free agent. So if someone comes in and buys Raymond James, there's no handcuffs in your channel that keep you at the firm. That what hopefully keeps you there for the shareholders' sake is that they are providing you good value for a reasonable price and you're happy and you stay put. And so I think that's a good argument. So for the RA platforms out there that, again, make it very well known, you are a free agent. If there ever is a change in control or circumstances change, we have to constantly keep you here, not because there's a wall keeping you here or handcuffs keeping you here. It's because you see value in staying here. So again, that's where choosing, if it makes sense for you to join an existing RA, there's certainly some that will acquire your practice and you're there. That's it. That's pretty ironclad. There is no leaving, or you can leave, but you're not taking your clients with you. So it's just doing the due diligence to know the different flavors. And the good news is there's a lot of flavors. So you can find something you like. It depends on your circumstances, but you do have to take the time to sort through it.
For sure. And there's a lot. And obviously you're intertwined with a lot of them and get to kind of see what's going on. There are advisors in a lot of ways should never consider independence or not, and some don't want to. The idea of a turnkey solution on an employee side or non-employee side, there's different strokes for different folks. If you're looking out there at the advisor community today, who are the type of advisors that should consider RIA? They're missing something that they're not getting either in the employee channel or in the independent side.
Yeah, certainly quite a few employee W-2 advisors break away every year and go into the space. But at a macro level, and this is the Brad Wales prediction of the industry future, right? I'm of the belief there will always be W-2 employee channels because there are always advisors. I've had a lot of conversations with advisors and they fully understand they could have better economics in the RIA model. They fully understand they can have better flexibility, but they say to me, and not in an arrogant way or anything, but they say, look, I'm netting $600,000 a year. I don't work on Fridays and I come in at 9 and I leave at 3. I got a pretty good life. I don't need any more upside. And I respect that. And that will always be there. And that I think that W-2 model will always fit for those type of advisors. Where I think the industry will continue to get squeezed, though, is folks more in that independent broker dealer channel that are becoming increasingly fee-based, because as you took the responsibility of managing your local expenses, so having that own office, having your own staff, having to figure out payroll. And again, a lot of folks don't want anything to do with that, and that's fine. But for the folks that have taken that on, you see this as they become more and more fee-based, they're questioning, well, why shouldn't I just take that final step and go fully RIA? And so a lot of the conversations I have is that type of conversation. And I think it's going to be tough to give a reason why folks should necessarily stay put where they are when there's a different pathway that possibly provides even more flexibility, even more economics on top of the responsibility they've already demonstrated they are willing to take on.
Yeah, I guess that's where the size of your practice, but also the flexibility of your practice. I've had this debate with other advisors. Personally, I'm happy on the independent side as of now, but they'll come back at me and go, well, you're just giving away revenue to give away revenue. But there's a comfortability to know that you are affiliated, and then you got to make that decision. And they'll say, well, you got to create your own ADV. There's all that kind of comes along with it that allows you some flexibility. And I'm always trying to explore what I'm missing, right? I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of different ways we can all go as advisors.
And a lot of folks are very happy in an independent broker-dealer setting, and it serves them well, and the firm is a good choice for them, and the value they get for what they pay for is a fit. Again, I have no illusions, and then I don't preach, oh, everyone should go RIA, but I do preach, hey, you should potentially at least understand it, and so you can compare it to what you have, and ultimately, if you say, hey, what I have is pretty good, there's absolutely nothing wrong with staying put in whatever channel someone's in.
Two more questions.
Sure.
I always like asking this question because sometimes we get an interesting response. You hang up on this and you're thinking, there was one point I really wanted to get across today, and I didn't get asked that, but I really think this is a really good piece of advice for the audience. What would that be, Brad?
Again, not to harp on the education piece, I wrote a recent article about this of kind of the two main reasons advisors don't go to the RIA model. One is inertia. It's easier to do nothing than make a move. I get it's easy for me to say that there's a lot involved. And then the other is just that lack of understanding. And again, I'm biased. I believe in the RIA model. I made a career bet that the RIA model will only continue to grow. So take what I say with a grain of salt, but it is what it is. The river only runs in one direction. The industry continues to go more and more towards RIA. So I just tell any advisor, say, hey, that doesn't mean it's going to be for you, but there's a reason that's the direction things are flowing. So if you haven't already, just take the time to better understand it. That as much as I'd love you to call me and talk to me, you don't have to call me. There's free resources on my website you can look at and everything, but at least understand it better and understand if it is something worth you exploring and if it's a fit. Because if it's, at least if you do that, and then you maybe confirm that you are in the best spot, then all these naysayers or people preaching for or against it, you know exactly where you stand. So action item, I'd say just take the time to better understand it. It doesn't hurt to educate yourself.
Yeah, I spoke to a couple advisors that have actually recently got on the show that were questioning. There's so many conflicts of interest in our business, and there's so many people that want advisors' business that you'll constantly hear, oh, you shouldn't do that, or you could do that. And advisors maybe are not spending the extra time they need to really dive deep. And a lot of times when advisors are looking to potentially make a move, there's a timetable situation where that can hurt. So you should know what you know before you need to know what you know, to say. And then Brad, last thing, you're looking at the advisor network out there. What's one specific trait that you look for in an advisor when you're talking to them about going RIA?
Yeah, so the first question I typically always ask almost every advisor I talk to, say, hey, what has motivated you to talk to someone like me? And you hear, is it because of, are they frustrations with their current arrangement, or is it they think the grass is greener over here, and what is it going to be, and they want to explore that and learn more about it? So there's all kinds of different motivations I hear, but if I was just looking at a blank slate and trying to size someone up, clearly any flavor of independence requires an entrepreneurial desire and vision. You are responsible for more things than you were back when you were in a bank setting. And that takes work. There's ups and downs trying to figure all those things out. It also kind of maybe arguably makes it more enjoyable when it is your thing that you're working through. But if you don't have that drive and the desire to own something, to go through whatever steps are needed to make that work, it's just not going to work. And again, that comes back to that employee model is perfectly fine for you. And there are RIA models that are employee, and then that might be a fit as well. But I'd say, and again, this applies across the quote unquote independent spectrum, is that entrepreneurial need or desire needs to be there, or it's just not going to work.
Perfect. And I agree, but I'll just add on top, if there's certain things like not wanting to open an office or worry about payroll, there are turnkey approaches and there are financial advisors that let you own your own practice, let you do your own things, and give you some support on the levels that you want the support. There is a bunch of things out there. Somebody like Brad is a tremendous resource. I've heard that from many advisors that have gone independent or RIA that they wish they had a consultant on their side to learn about the ins and outs. Brad, if our audience wants to get a hold of you, how can they reach you?
Yep, appreciate the opportunity to make a plug. I'm a big believer, and I won't even give out my phone number or email because I want people to see the value I can provide first. And so if you go to transition2ria.com, again, you can see all the videos I make and podcasts and articles. And if you're listening to this here, I'm a big believer that you have to prove the value you can add before you expect anyone to chat with you. So for anyone that wants to go to, again, transition2ria.com, take a look. If you'd like to chat, very easy to do so right there on the website. There's a contact link. It'll get you set right up.
Fantastic, Brad. And just giving Brad a little bit of an endorsement, the two people that I truly trust Brad. So that goes a long way. And thanks again for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And again, congrats. Amazing start. And I just hope you can keep up the pace.
Let's see if we keep the pace going. I plan on it. So for those of you out there, if you want to get a hold of Brad, you want to get a hold of me, you can reach me on LinkedIn at Evan Mayer. You know our LinkedIn page, our Instagram, and everything else. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'll see you on the next one.